do have a few moments here. We are live. Good afternoon, Board Chair Edson. It is now 1 o'clock. We if you would like to give a few moments for the new board members and board member alternates to log on.
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. We're just waiting a couple of minutes to get some people out of the waiting room and before we start.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Board Chair Edson, we're currently missing two new board members, excuse me.
And have they responded that they were going to attend?
One has, yes. Actually, yes, excuse me. Both have confirmed their attendance.
Okay. Let's give it one more minute.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, the time is now 1:03 and we've got a pretty healthy agenda. So at this time, I would like to call to order the February 24th, 2022 North County Transit Board, new board member orientation. Before we begin, I'd like to inform members of the public who may be viewing the meeting on the district's YouTube page that in order to make a public comment during the meeting, you must connect to the meeting using the Zoom link provided on the agenda. In addition, you must register to speak by sending an email containing your name and or phone number and the agenda item on which you wish to speak to clerk@nctd.org. Imelda, please call the roll.
Thank you. Christopher Rodriguez. Peter Weiss.
Here.
Kelly Hinsey.
Here.
Joy Linz. Katie Melendez.
Present.
Julietson.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Imelda. Please provide a safety brief and review evacuation procedures.
I'm sorry, may I just interrupt? This is Lori Winfrey, General Counsel.
Yes.
So I just noted through the roll call that it appears we don't have a quorum of the board for the presentations today. However, on the agenda, there is no action to be taken by the board. This is simply staff presentations. So I believe we can proceed.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank-
Imelda, please proceed with the safety brief.
Thank you.
Thank
For
you.
those here in the building, in case of an emergency, I will dial 911. In case of an evacuation, please take the stairs. Do not use the elevators. Once cleared of the building, do not re-enter unless cleared to do so by emergency personnel. There are fire extinguishers and first aid kits on each floor of the building. There is a portable defibrillator on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures if needed. This concludes my safety brief.
Thank you, Imelda. Do we have any public comments today?
No, Board Chair, we do not.
Thank you. At this time, we are ending the public registration to speak on this item. Before we proceed, I have two quick items of protocol and some background to share. Protocol-wise, I ask that board members please hold comments and questions until after each agenda item has been presented. And when the time comes for your questions and comments, please use the raise hand function and wait until you're called upon to speak. I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself. First and foremost, I'm a bit of a transit nerd. Born and raised in San Diego, I grew up taking the bus to Balboa Park, the zoo, and to the beach. These days, I most often ride the train. In fact, one of the primary reasons I chose to move to Solana Beach was because it has both a train station and the 101 bus. My career has allowed me to live in cities that offer world-class public transportation, including Tokyo and New York City. And when traveling domestically or internationally, I always check out local public transit. I was appointed by my city to serve on Nctd in 2017, recently elected chair of this illustrious board. I previously served as Nctd's vice chair. Since joining the board in 2017, I've held leadership roles on MISPDA, the Marketing, Service Planning, and Business Development Committee, and PATH, the Performance Administration and Finance Committee, and also served on a couple of MISPDA-related subcommittees. And I serve on the executive committee, of course. I've also enjoyed the opportunity to represent the district on external boards, including the Sandag Transportation Committee and now the Sandag Board. And I'm the newly elected vice chair of the LoSAN board. For those of you who may not be familiar with LoSAN, LoSAN is the managing agency for the Amtrak Pacific Surfliner Intercity Rail Service. The point I'm making is that if you, like me, care about growing and improving public transportation in our region, you've come to the right place to help and make that happen. We have two informal items on today's agenda. For the first, I'll begin by presenting initial slides, which provide information about the district's mission, vision, and goals, along with information about the board and the two employees that directly report to us. That would be the executive director and general counsel. Then I will pass the presentation to various Nctd staff members to provide brief overviews about themselves and what they do. Within this agenda item, Yoon will be providing an update on the district's budget framework. Feel free to raise your hand with questions. Please keep questions focused to the presentation. At the close of the meeting, staff will provide a form on which you may indicate if there are additional topics that you would like to discuss with staff or have presented in the future. See, Imelda, please advance the slides for me. Our mission is to deliver safe, convenient, reliable, and user-friendly public transportation services. Next slide, please. NCT's vision is to build an integrated transit system that enables our customers to travel easily and efficiently throughout our growing region. We will achieve this by placing service to our customers first, ensuring the safety and security of our employees and customers, delivering high-quality transit services, developing and maintaining facilities that sustain and promote current and future transportation services, securing adequate revenue, protecting our assets, and getting the maximum return on the public's investment, working in partnership with our communities and other stakeholders, and encouraging innovation, creativity, and leadership. Next slide, please. The governing mission of, the governing mission statement for the board of directors states that the board is responsible for representing the citizens of North San Diego County in providing strategic and policy level leadership to ensure that NCTD meets the public transportation needs of the region in a full, safe, timely, and cost-effective manner. As elected officials, NCTD is often one of the many boards, committees, and commissions that we serve on. The result is a full plate of activities. Those plates for many of us may also include a private sector job. Since NCTD is not our full-time job, we hire an executive director and to lead our day-to-day operations and a general counsel to support legal and compliance activities. Accordingly, the board of directors is policy-oriented. We establish controls through the adoption of policies and ordinances. We approve an annual budget, require an annual audit, approve procurements over a set level, and conduct performance evaluations of the two positions that directly report to us. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm trying to keep two things going on here. The executive director's employment agreement establishes that they hold the highest ranking position at NCTD. Matt Tucker's employment agreement establishes his responsibility for the day-to-day operations of the district, with the board's responsibility to guide policy direction. The next two slides include details of Matt's responsibilities as executive director. It's important to note that Board Policy 19 codifies these responsibilities and delegates certain authorities to the executive director. Board Policy 19 will be reviewed in a few minutes by our senior legal advisor, Jacob Gold. In order for the executive director to fulfill his responsibility, as indicated on this slide, for establishing a proposed set of short-range goals, an action plan, next month, beginning with the March Executive Committee meeting, Matt will provide his proposed budget guidance and areas of strategic focus. These will then be presented at the March board meeting to the full board. Next slide, please. One of the top requirements for the executive director is management of the district's financial health. He's also charged with oversight of the legislative program and collaboration with the board and external stakeholders, such as our city managers. Next slide, please. So enough about Matt. It's time to talk about how the board provides direction to the executive director. We should be on slide 7. In summary, the executive director receives guidance from the board from the chair or from committees to which the board has granted power to provide guidance to the executive director. This requirement is intended to ensure that the executive director follows board direction. An efficient and effective board works as a team. If you have an individual request, such as placement of an item on the agenda, please work through either the board by making a request during member comments, through me as chair, or through a committee to provide direction to the executive director. Next, let's talk about the general counsel, please. We should be on slide 8. Thank you.
Oh, Chair.
Yes.
Chair, oh, sorry to interrupt. I think what it is, there's 2 different versions of the presentation.
Okay.
And Imelda should be moving back to the general counsel, which is the place where you're going.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. My screen's only big enough to hold so much. I could just see the numbers in the corner and they weren't lining up with what I'd worked on before. So thank you, Matt. General counsel position. Many moons ago, well before my time on the board, Nctd contracted for legal services. Based on the district's significant responsibility and changes to the business model, the board determined it was in the best interest to hire a general counsel to support the legal and compliance requirements and needs of the district. In April 2013, the board hired Nctd's first in-house counsel, Lori Winfrey. It's important to understand that the general counsel position supports the full board and not the individual interests of board members. It's also important to note that the board, when it decided to hire in-house general counsel, wanted to foster a collaborative relationship between the general counsel and executive director functions, while simultaneously creating a system of checks and balances. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Matt, followed by Lori. They will share some background information about themselves. Then we'll have brief introductions from Matt's direct reports. After that, our CFO, Yoon Park Lynch, will provide a high-level overview of the budget, which will complete agenda item 1 of the board orientation. We have a lot left to cover, so unless there are questions for me, I'll turn it over to Matt. I don't see any hands raised. Matt, take it away.
Thank you, Jewel. Could we go? Thank you, Imelda. So a little bit about myself. Like most public transit professionals, we typically move around the country a lot. And I've been one of those folks who've moved around the country a lot. Prior to coming to Nctd, I worked as the director of the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. In that position, I was responsible for statewide public transportation, as well as statewide transportation demand management and management of our rail program, which was primarily related to implementation of new rail services and public-private partnership agreements with Class 1 railroads and short-line railroads. It was a very interesting job that allowed me to work across a broad spectrum of projects. If you ever travel to DC and fly into Dulles Airport, one of the projects that I worked on is the project that brought rail service to the Dulles Airport. Significant project activities really with supporting economic development and mobility throughout the state of Virginia. Prior to that, I did work in San Jose, California, as the Chief Operating Officer at the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority. In that position, I was responsible for about 80% of the employees that directly worked at that agency that employed over 2,000 employees. It was a multimodal agency that also advanced projects, including road improvements. It's an agency that mostly mirrors a combination of both MTS and SANDAG as an operating entity combined. Prior to that, I worked in the city of Phoenix as the city of Phoenix public transit director. And I initially started my transit career in Richmond, Virginia. I'm a Virginia guy, where I served in numerous positions, including an intern, before leaving as the deputy general manager. I have a background in urban and regional planning, undergraduate degree in political science and a minor in military science. I'm a retired Army Reserve infantry officer. So as you can see, my career spans a pretty broad spectrum. As a kid, just as background information, my father owned a construction company. And so that was kind of my first taste of private activity, and as well as being a Baptist minister. So you will hear me preach from time to time. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Lori to introduce herself. Lori?
Thank you. So I want to welcome all the new board members. Thank you, Jewel, for your kind words earlier. I came here to Nctd from a transportation background. Prior to coming to Nctd back in my undergraduate and law school days at UCLA, I worked for Lufthansa German Airline. And that segued into what has now been a 25-year career for the most part in the transportation law field, 22 of those years as a practicing attorney. And after leaving Lufthansa, which I did work in their legal department during law school, I transitioned into a big multinational firm that was focused on their aviation practice group. My clients were all over the world, primarily in the European market, Eurocopter Deutschland, Eurocopter France, Socrata Aircraft, EADS, and so forth. So my work was primarily related to big mass disaster cases, representing these firms in product liability cases. So I litigated cases in that capacity for a number of years. And my life took a turn after I had a couple of children, and their father was active duty in the military, and I realized I needed to spend some time actually on US soil. So I left my firm back in 2010 and took a position at the San Diego County Office of County Counsel. And that was a huge change. I was not in the transportation sector anymore. However, the firm that I worked with prior to that had done work for the Office of County Counsel. And I was familiar with them in that capacity. So I went in originally as a litigator, but quickly transitioned into an advisory attorney there, primarily working for the Department of General Services and the Office of Ethics and Compliance. And that was my first sort of foray into the public sector employment. And I realized the importance that ethics and compliance has in the public sector. It does also in the private sector, but it's a different sort of animal in the public sector. I had the opportunity there for those 3 years to assist with and be the legal advisor to modify and change what used to be the Office of Internal Affairs into a new Office of Ethics and Compliance. And that gave me a lot of exposure to the Board of Supervisors. At some point along the way, I learned of this position here that the board in October of 2012 had voted to add a general counsel in-house position at Nctd. And I was very delighted to know that there was a potential transportation-related legal job in North County, San Diego, close to home, that I might be a candidate for. And so, as you can see, all said and done, I actually was successful with that in that recruitment. And I've been now with Nctd for the past 9 years, just headed into my 9th year in April of this year. And I was very happy to return back to my transportation roots. Next slide. So just very briefly, I just wanted you to be aware of the various umbrellas or various components to the umbrella of the Office of General Counsel here at Nctd. This very small group of staff is responsible for all legal matters related to Nctd. We do have a senior legal counsel who you'll hear from a little bit later. He's going to provide an overview of the governance of Nctd and the board policies, which is very important for board members to be familiar with as those guide the governance of the board. He does provide primary legal counsel to the department or the division, Development Services Division, related to land use and things of that nature. He's also responsible for overseeing a very large insurance profile and portfolio that we have here at Nctd related to rail operations. We also have a staff attorney who is also our designated civil rights officer, and he is responsible for overseeing our disadvantaged business enterprise and small business programs, equal employment opportunity, Title VI, and ADA compliance. He also serves as the DBE liaison officer, which is a requirement of our federal funding. We have a risk administrator who is responsible for claims management and assisting with investigations and determinations of claims that we receive, and manages the day-to-day activity for the insurance program. We also have a compliance officer, which is very important here at Nctd because we have a lot of grant funding with a lot of oversight by regulatory agencies. And the compliance officer is responsible for overseeing our internal audit program and our comprehensive compliance and oversight program. And then finally, under the Office of General Counsel, presently, for the last several years, I've had direct oversight of our Procurement and Contract Administration Division, which has various staff related to procuring all the things that we need to procure and ensuring that we're in a state of readiness here at Nctd. Next slide. Next slide, please. And now I think I'm turning it over to our executive director.
Yes. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about Nctd. Nctd is a multimodal operator within the transportation space. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of our modes without trying to make you become a transit junkie right away. I would just say to all of you all coming onto the board, take your time and pace yourself. We use a lot of acronyms. We say lots of things sometimes that will be confusing, that you will need to ask us to slow down and explain what that is. But over time, you will definitely become more familiar with some of the vernacular we use and some of the unique things that we will state as compared to what you would be using as typical normal vernacular or within your city environment. So we operate Breeze Fixed Route Bus, Sprinter Hybrid Rail. And on this one, I'm just going to give you guys just a little bit of a primer on this. So you're going to hear the use of the words hybrid rail, commuter rail, and light rail, and as well as the word heavy rail. Those are different types of services that operate. And sometimes people interchange those words, but they actually have distinct meanings within our industry. So hybrid rail is really essentially what it is saying. It's a combination of both commuter rail and light rail. So the example of light rail for all of you all would be MTS. The trolleys that they operate are referred to light rail. It's not about the rate of the vehicle, the weight of the vehicle. It's about the carrying capacity of the vehicle. Commuter rail is what we operate on the coaster. Sometimes you will hear people use the word heavy rail. But heavy rail actually is what you should think of as in a subway system. So if you were to go into LA and ride the Red Line, or to go into DC or Chicago, those subway systems are heavy rail. And again, the use of the word heavy is not about the weight of the vehicle, it's about the carrying capacity of the vehicle. And so back to hybrid, it means it's a combination of both light rail and hybrid, light rail and commuter rail to generate the term hybrid rail. The Sprinter Hybrid Rail vehicle is a vehicle that is intended to be able to operate in both an FTA, Federal Transit Administration, and a Federal Railroad Administration environment. It's a smaller vehicle typically seen in a European environment. Nctd was one of the first operators of this type of rail technology in the United States. Currently, there are about 6 other agencies in the United States that operate hybrid rail. In terms of coastal commuter rail, there are about 30 to 32 other additional agencies that are operating commuter rail throughout the United States. LIFT is our Americans with Disabilities Act paratransit service. It's a service designed specifically for people who meet a specific requirement that they have a functional inability to use fixed route bus service. And so there is an assessment process that we conduct that's compliant with federal law to determine eligibility for that service. That would be distinguished from a service that you may see operated by FACT Full Access and Coordinated Transportation Services. I hope I got the acronym right, which primarily focuses on senior transportation. So from time to time, people will be confused, but LIFT is not about eligibility, is not determined based upon age. It's based upon your functional capability to complete a trip. Flex Paratransit is a service model that we operate that provides certain level of flexibility in terms of service. It's branded under Flex. It's a service that could be either fixed route service or it could be demand response types of services. It could be point deviated types of services. So that's one of our brands. Most recently, we launched a service called Nctd Plus, and that reflects kind of changes within this industry where you're going to see more flexible fleet types of services, microtransit. It includes some of the relationships we're going to have with Uber and Lyft to allow us to deliver more flexible types of services, really to meet first and last mile types of services, as well as allow people to have quicker trips for short distance. So that's kind of the family of services that we operate. One of the things that really distinguishes the Nctd is the fact that we're responsible for 82 directional miles of track that support freight and passenger rail operations. I'll just give you all kind of a little bit larger context that primarily throughout the United States, the private sector is the primary ownerships of the tracks that support freight and commuter rail operations. California is a very unique state in terms of which you see a lot of public ownership of railroad right-of-ways that support both intercity rail, which is Amtrak, commuter rail like Coaster and Metrolink services, and freight services. So Nctd, we are regulated by literally anybody you can think of. We are designated by the Surface Transportation Board as a common carrier responsible for interstate rail commerce movement. So that is a federal agency that kind of ensures that we are that the tracks that the service that we provide continue to operate in support of the interstate commerce system. Safety oversight is provided by the Federal Railroad Administration. We're deemed as the railroad of record, so we're responsible for everything that operates on the tracks and ensuring the safety of operations for Nctd's operations, as well as the railroads that we host on our railroad. We have specific agreements in place with Amtrak, Metrolink, and BNSF that support their operations on our tracks. Just to give you a little bit of background information, BNSF in their shared use agreement, MTS is an included party, but Nctd has operational control and responsibility for the entire track's operations. BNSF pays Nctd a maintenance fee. It's currently sits at about $6.7 million, $6.8 million per year to support the costs associated with their operations. Amtrak pays Nctd a fee as well to support their use of Nctd's infrastructure. As I previously stated, our operations are really highly regulated from a multitude of agencies, including the California Public Utilities Commission. We operate some significant technologies, including positive train control technology, which was a federally mandated technology to prevent accidents, primarily that would be human related. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of overview of Nctd in terms of our operations. Pre-COVID ridership, from a budget point of view, I won't spend a lot of time because Yoon's going to walk you through an overview of our budget within this presentation. We've also kind of identified the different types of fleet that we have here, just to give you just a high level thought process. So a bus on average could cost us, a CNG, compressed natural gas bus, about $550,000. We're in the process of purchasing hydrogen and battery buses. Those buses per unit can cost you between $800,000 and $900,000 per unit. And a locomotive will cost you about $8 million, just to give you context of how much these things cost. Next slide. These are some quick facts about our operations, about Nctd. This information is available on our website, and we continuously provide updates to the board about the monthly performance of the system. We also provide quarterly and annual reports as well. Next slide. Here's our organizational chart. I know it's a lot of information to try to absorb, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time to absorb it. Other than the fact just to say that we're organized in a way to support our day-to-day operations. We have a safety department, which is direct report to me, a planning, marketing, and communications department, an administrative services department, bus operations, finance, operations support services, a rail department, a technology department, a development services, and a procurement department. Next slide. So in terms of the makeup of our employment, you can see right now the vast majority of our employees are contracted employees. So our bus system is currently fully contracted out, as well as our facilities and rail. The board recently approved last year a process that will allow us to insource our rail operations. So over the next 12 months or so, we will be bringing rail operations in-house. So that means we will be directly employing those folks that support our rail operations. For some of you who've been around the region for some time, you would know that when I arrived, the district was facing a pretty significant financial challenge. We had 5-year deficits that were projected at over $80 million. As you saw previously, our budget was about 120 million today. It's about 100 million back then. And we were faced with some pretty significant choices. So one of the decisions that we made was to outsource our bus system at that time to help us achieve financial stability. And I will tell you that over the course of the last 10 years plus, we have been able to achieve financial stability. Next slide, please. So the board chair mentioned that I'll be coming to the board in the course of March to talk about my budget, proposed budget guidance and strategic areas of focus. As she stated, that's kind of the kickoff to the budget process. It allows the board to give staff input at the early stages of the budget development process and to make sure that the things that staff is going to pursue are consistent with the direction that the board will want the staff to pursue. So those are going to be significant opportunities for you to provide input and direction and feedback. It's critical that you do that because it helps us to make sure that we're on track. In terms of kind of some core things for me and my day-to-day job, for financial health and sustainability is one of the key topics. Because it's one of the things that without that, it's really hard to focus on providing high quality service because it also drives our ability to meet our state of good repair needs and provide the different types of services that we need to provide to meet the market expectations. One of my other additional areas of focus is continued performance improvement. Obviously, providing a high quality service is a critical element to attracting riders. So that's something I have to pay close attention. Strategic planning is another area. It's critical because we have to know what's around the corner. Technology is transforming things rather quickly. And you take into consideration what's happened recently with the impacts of COVID-19. We constantly have to plan and adapt and adjust our plans without leering from one side of the ship to the other side of the ship. But one of my focus is to make sure we have a solid strategic plan that is flexible so that we can take advantage of opportunities that may come up, and as well as to be prepared to deal with unfortunate things like downturns in the economy that may pose risk to our long-term financial structure. The next item is always safety. Safety is one of the key items, a focus for the district, particularly as a railroad operator as well as a bus operator. But on the rail side, we carry more than $300 million worth of liability insurance to support our operations. And it's critical because that insurance is fairly expensive that we keep our eye on the ball on safety. Having an event could be really catastrophic to the district, not just from a financial point of view, but from perspective of human loss, whether it be our customers and employees. So that's obviously something that I have to focus on, as well as the entire NCTD team. So now that I've wrapped up this slide, I'm going to be turning it over to our individual chiefs to introduce themselves. And I'm going to kick the ball off with Laura Cote, who's our Chief Administrative Officer. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I really appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself. And as Matt had mentioned, my name is Laura Cote, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer. I've been with NCTD for about 9 months at this time and have really enjoyed my transition into the organization. Prior to joining the district, I was with the San Diego Association of Governments for 15 years, most recently as their Chief Operating Officer. And before that, I was a partner at a consulting firm that specialized in assisting companies, both private and nonprofit, some government, with overall organization effectiveness. So my work has always had a particular emphasis in positive psychology and employee wellness. And this is a big part of what I am bringing to the role here at NCTD. So my responsibilities include work in organization effectiveness, and I am heavily involved in a project that Matt just spoke about, which is around our strategic plan. And some of you have hopefully been a part of that. We have invited quite a few of our board members, mayors, et cetera, to provide some input into refreshing our plan, our mission and vision, et cetera. So my other responsibilities also include employee development and talent acquisition. So the resourcing of this organization. Also employee wellness is a big part of what we're focusing on. And I also represent the teams that support all of you for your board and committee meetings. Our clerks of the board, Anthony Flores and Imelda Kubota, are names you will become familiar with if you haven't already. They stand ready to assist you with any information requests you might have. They also manage board payments, travel, reimbursements, et cetera. And so they are there for you. If you have any questions or need to get a hold of any of us and you are having trouble getting a hold of us, they will track us down. So please reach out to them if you need anything. So thank you again for the opportunity. And at this point, I would like to hand things off to Tracy Foster.
Laura, and good afternoon, board members. First off, just a little bit about me. Fresh out of college many moons ago, I started my career in the relocation industry, administering relocation benefits for corporate clients, basically just helping them get their employees from point A to point B. This actually used to be a pretty big industry well before remote working and virtual meetings became a thing. After learning the relocation ropes, I moved into management, leading service delivery teams and managing their client relationships. From there, I switched gears a little bit and moved into the biotech industry, managing a company's real estate worldwide. That experience included acquisitions and dispositions of real estate and included developing capital projects for the build out of new facilities. My NCTD career and introduction to the public sector started in 2011. I've had a few different positions at NCTD, starting in real estate, expanding responsibilities to include facilities, and now leading the Development Service Division since 2017. Matt mentioned we love our acronyms, so you may hear it referred to as DSD. So a little bit more about the areas in my division. Our facilities team ensures that all NCTD sites, which includes administrative buildings, operation facilities, stations, and bus stops, are all properly maintained. This includes maintenance services such as things like janitorial and landscaping, as well as preventative and reactive maintenance of systems and equipment. The facility work is outsourced primarily to Bombardier, and we have many other specialty agreements, things like plumbing and electrical, to further support the maintenance activities. As approved by the board last year, the outsourcing activities that are performed by Bombardier will be coming in-house to NCTD in July of 2023. Facilities also performs many capital projects to ensure that our assets are in a state of good repair. Moving on to our rail engineering team, they support major capital projects that Sandag delivers on behalf of Nctd, as well as delivering on other Nctd capital projects. The team also ensures the safety of our right-of-way through the monitoring of our bridges, the slopes and embankments and other infrastructure that may be within the right-of-way. The real estate team manages all of our Nctd property interests, including property access permitting, and supports the many redevelopment activities that you heard about last week. The real estate portfolio that for Nctd currently generates approximately $2 million annually. Lastly, our maintenance of way team keeps not only our tracks maintained, but also the entire right-of-way for both the San Diego subdivision, which runs from the county line to San Diego, and the Escondido subdivision, which runs from Oceanside to Escondido. This maintenance, which is performed by Bombardier, includes activities like tree trimming and vegetation removal, drainage and culvert cleaning, and graffiti removal. And that wraps up DSD. I will now hand off to Ryan Cashion, who is our Chief Technology Officer.
Thanks, Tracy. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Ryan Cashion. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here. Around college time, I started ISPs and different technology companies back in the day. Went on to work for larger corporations doing the same. Including EADS North America. I spent a lot of time there. Then I came to Nctd about 13 years ago as a senior systems administrator, systems engineer here. After a little shakeup in the division, I was asked to step in as interim CTO and was promoted not much longer after that. We've built a great technology team here. We're highly skilled. I'm very proud of the staff that we've been able to bring on board and build the division stronger, because basically we are obviously supporting all the users, but mainly we support a lot of the divisions. We kind of have our hands in everything technology based, including, like we said, being the subject matter expert and helping with all of the other divisions' procurements. We're in charge of all the major systems internally here at Nctd, the network, the the system infrastructure, and all of the security involved with such. We have 2 full data centers here at Nctd that we take care of. And additionally, we have some of the major components of the district within the division itself, including fare collection, which is the shared system with MTS, JD Edwards, and other major technologies. Just recently, we started a rail technologies group, which historically rail has not needed such interaction, but with the developing technologies and the modernization of all the signals and systems and PTC, we've decided that it was best to bring it in-house with IT. So that's one of the newer departments that we've started here. With that, I would like to turn it over to Jennifer Taylor.
Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, Chair Edson and members of the board. My name is Jennifer Taylor, and I am the Chief Procurement and Contract Administration Officer for the district. I've been here almost 5 years and bring over 30 years of experience with the last 20 plus in the public sector. I've worked for 2 other transit agencies, as well as the County of Riverside and a small city north of here. I served as the president of the California Association of Public Procurement Officials in 2011 and 12, and have my bachelor's in administrative studies and earned my lifetime certified purchasing manager designation. The Procurement and Contract Administration Division is responsible for the acquisition of goods and services to support the district. And we do that in compliance with the local, state, and federal laws and regulations, including the Public Contract Code, the Federal Transit Administration Circular 4220.1F, and of course, the board policies. And my role is to ensure fair and open competition, to ensure that all of the regulations are adhered to, and assist with the contract process throughout, from the requisition all the way through closeout. And board policy number 19 is where the board has delegated authority to the executive director to enter into agreements and task orders up to $200,000 and modifications up to $100,000. And with that, I will turn it over to our friend, Chris Orlando.
Good afternoon, board members. I am Chris Orlando, Chief Planning and Communications Officer. I've been with Nctd just a little under 9 months now, joined back in June. I come from the private sector where I had a 25-year plus career in key functions for corporate and consulting roles for companies as large as 17,000 employees. My most recent role prior to joining Nctd, I co-founded and built and sold a successful financial services technology company. So did that right before I joined. My background also includes more than a decade of public service. I was a San Marcos City Council member for 3 terms, about 12 years in San Marcos. And during that time, I served on the Nctd Board of Directors for about 6 years, including both as chair and as vice chair. And also represented the Nctd at Lausanne for a number of years. During my time in San Marcos, I also served on the SANDAG Board of Directors for about 6 years, working both on the executive committee for a portion of that time and as chair of the Regional Energy Working Group. So bring to Nctd both the long private sector career in a number of key functions, as well as a public sector career here in San Diego. My educational background is I have an MBA from George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and a BA in political science from UCSB here in California. My responsibilities here at Nctd are four main functions. So the planning department, which develops the service planning, ridership development, and strategic planning for the district. Government affairs, which does our advocacy, public and legislative affairs, as well as our funding and grant strategy. The marketing and communications team, which does all of the district's marketing, our public relations, communications, advertising, both our purchased advertising that we do to promote Nctd services, but also our bought advertising, meaning the advertising we sell on our vehicles and other assets that generate revenue for the district, so both programs. That department also does our community outreach, our public information, and our media relations. So all of those functions are within the department. And then also our customer service team. So our customer service agents that are at the transit centers and call centers and have that frontline contact with the customers. All those folks also report in through the team. That's an overview of my background and the departments that I oversee, and happy to welcome Sean Lufboer to the discussion.
All right, thank you, Chris. Good afternoon. I'm Sean Lufboer. I'm the Chief of Safety. I've been with Nctd coming up on 6 years. Previously, I served in the United States Navy. I did 20 years active duty with my final assignment as the Safety Director on board USS Carl Vinson. That allowed a nice transition from safety responsibility for ships and aircraft over to now buses and trains. I am a certified safety professional as well, with my undergraduate degree in biology and then a master's in operations management. As far as what I do here, ultimately, I lead the division with 4 safety specialists in various specific areas, whether that be rail, bus, or compliance and auditing. I do want to make sure that we are compliant. As Matt alluded to earlier, there's plenty of regulatory oversight, especially on the rail modes, from both the FRA, the FTA, as well as the state through the CPUC. I'm responsible for drafting safety plans. We have 2, one for the FRA and one for the FTA. They have separate rules. The FTA safety plan, for example, has to be approved by the Board of Directors. So as that plan is updated, I do come to the board of directors to present that plan and see if there's any questions on that. I lead the internal safety and security audit program that is for not only NCTD staff, but as well as our contractors. There's a rule that requires that we audit our different programs in various functional areas to make sure that they're compliant with the rules. I also lead our risk register meetings, which is a meeting to discuss efficient and effective operations and discuss agency level risk or things that need to be addressed. And I'm also responsible based on the safety plans for hazard management. Our safety plans are based on the safety management system principles where we want to identify hazards prior to them becoming accidents or incidents. So we want to mitigate them when we can, when they're little things, before they become big things. And a significant portion of that is identifying and resolving hazards to the lowest level practical. Additionally, for those of you that were at the board last month, I also present quarterly safety reports to the board of directors that provides a statistical review of accidents, incidents, other safety concerns throughout the district for all of our modes. And I do that on a quarterly basis, so you'll see me at a minimum at that time. That's all I have to present at this time. I will now hand it off to Damon Blythe, who's our Chief Operations Officer for BUS.
Good afternoon. My name is Damon Blythe. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for BUS. I've been with Nctd now for a little over 9 years. I came on board here in the Rail Operations Department, and then in 2016 took an opportunity to join the Bus and Service Planning Department, and in 2018 became the Chief Operations Officer for BUS. Prior to my time here at Nctd, I was at the Utah Transit Authority in Salt Lake City, a little over 14 years there, in a wide variety of roles, from rail capital project oversight, special events, operations planning, including the Winter Olympics, the rail control room oversight, operations supervision, and also service planning. I do have a Bachelor's of Science in Business Management. As far as my duties here at Nctd, I do have a team of 5 folks working in my department. Our job is to ensure safe and reliable transportation on Nctd's rubber tire modes, which are Breeze, Lift, and Flex. All of those modes are operated by one contractor, MB Transportation. That contract started in 2017. Our primary function here in our division is the oversight of that contractor, making sure that they are doing what we need them to do in a safe and reliable way. That contract covers everything bus operations, so they are responsible for operators, dispatchers, reservationists, street supervisors, facility and vehicle maintenance staff, as well as administration. So every time you see a bus operator or a road supervisor or someone working on the bus, those folks are all MB employees, and it's our job to make sure that they are adhering by the contract. In addition, my department also procures and manages several capital projects, including new buses and overhauls on those buses of major components such as engines and transmissions. We just recently took delivery of 30 brand new CNG buses. Those buses are slowly rolling out in Escondido now, and shortly they'll be rolling out in Oceanside. We have 6 battery electric buses coming on board later this year, and we are just getting ready to purchase 8 fuel cell buses that will be delivered in the middle of next year. We're very excited about those new buses and the new technologies and challenges that we will have coming with them. And now I'll turn it over to Graham Blackwell.
Thank you, Damon. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Graham Blackwell. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Rail here in North County. I'm pretty new. I've been here since October of 2020. I have 20 plus years in the rail industry, and I've been in operations leadership since 1998. When I came out of the military, I started with freight with Canadian Pacific. I was in Toronto, Southern Ontario, Canada. I worked every position from engineer conductor up through terminal coordinator, train master, and finished as superintendent. I was lucky enough to work all across Canada. In 2013, I made the choice to go over to passenger service, because passenger service is the future of rail. There I worked on the Metrolink site, which is the 4th largest commuter rail rail operation in North America. I was supervisor and manager of train operations and had the good fortune of commissioning the Union Pearson Express for Metrolinx, which is a DMU service that runs from the airport to downtown. After that, I went over to global operations, support, and business improvement. I was fortunate again to support sites and operations, rail, light, hybrid, and heavy, as Matt mentioned, all over the world, from Sweden to Israel to Germany to Canada, Australia. It was a phenomenal experience, and then I was lucky enough to bring the experience over to Nctd. What we do here in rail, we're the safe, reliable part of the trains operations for Coaster and Sprinter, keeping us compliant with all our FRA, FTA, CPUC. Currently, right now, rail operations is contracted to Bombardier Transportation, but we are in the middle of transitioning. Same with our maintenance of equipment. What we do there is with the quality and preventative part of the Coaster and Sprinter maintenance programs. We run the capital programs for the rail vehicles, just like Damon does for bus. We oversee the TSMMAs and TSMMS in conjunction with Siemens that provide the 20-year materials management agreement to make sure we have those chargers in good state of repair, and we just signed another one for 12 years for the Sprinter DMU. All our vehicles are in some kind of state of overhaul. Our DMUs are in their half-life, being completed by June of 2023. We're overhauling a lot of our bi-levels. We just took 5 new locomotives last year. They went into service February 8th. We're receiving another 11 Bombardier bi-level coach this year. We'll get 4 more Siemens Charger locomotives that we have to mobilize and commission, and then we'll be able to support future expansion of coaster service. As well as operations and maintenance, we're also responsible for the maintenance of signals. Right now, we oversee Bombardier, who's the contracted signal maintainer, and signals is everything, including crossings, signals, and PTC. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Karen Tucholsky, the Chief Operations Officer of Support Services.
Thank you, Graham. Good afternoon, board members. As Graham said, my name is Karen Tucholsky, and I am our Chief of Operations Support Services. I've been with Nctd for over 9 years now, and I've had the privilege of serving in a variety of capacities. I started here originally as Human Resources Manager and then was promoted to Chief Administrative Officer, and I have been in my current role since May of 2021. As you can see on here, I have a passion for customer service and working in industries that provide exceptional customer service. I have spent my career working across a mix of service-based industries. In my current position with Nctd, I oversee team members in 3 departments, working very closely with my colleagues Graham and Damon over in bus and rail operations. Our Operations Support Services Department provides training and instructional design support as well as capital project support. Our Operations Control Center is the hub of our bus and rail dispatch services. That center, which is out in Escondido, operates 24/7 with staff who are responsible for dispatch service delivery on a daily basis, as well as leading service recovery during service disruptions, which do occur from time to time. Our security department is also a 24/7 operation, and they are responsible for helping to promote a safe and secure environment throughout our service area for both the public and for our employees as well. The team members in that department provide closed-circuit TV monitoring throughout our facilities and transit centers, and that department also oversees our law enforcement MOUs with the San Diego Sheriff's Department and Oceanside and Escondido Police Departments. The security department and the Operations Control Center team work very closely together as well. Our CC technicians provide significant support for the Operations Control Center during emergency and first responder coordination as needed. That is a short overview of the division. I want to thank you for the opportunity to introduce the team to you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Yoon Park Lynch, our Chief Financial Officer.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Yoon Park Lynch. I am the Chief Financial Officer for Nctd. I have been with Nctd a little over 5 years, initially in my role as a controller, which I fulfilled for 2 years before I transitioned into the CFO role. I am a certified public accountant and also a certified management accountant. Prior to my employment with Nctd, I worked for CINERAC, which is a global clinical research organization. The firm provides over 4,000 clinical trials over 62 countries. I went through 2 acquisitions and was responsible for the purchase accounting, as well as the consolidated financial reporting and the audit oversight. Prior to Cinerac, I worked for 9 years as a senior audit manager for Aldrich. It's considered a top 100 firm in the country. I oversaw the financial audit for a wide range of organizations, including nonprofit, government agencies receiving federal funding, software development, construction, agriculture, and health and medical groups. Through that experience in public accounting, it allowed me to have a great understanding and knowledge surrounding processes and internal controls, which is one of my main roles here at Nctd, to make sure that we have the proper policies, procedures, and processes to ensure that we have strong controls to safeguard Nctd assets. At Nctd, within the finance division, I oversee a wide range of departments, which includes financial oversight, fair collection, accounting, grants, as well as a group of management analysts that support the operating budget process. In my role, we are also responsible to make sure that we comply with all financial reporting, either at federal, state, or local level, as well as providing support for financial audits and reporting to the National Transit Database, which is the acronym is Nctd. So you'll hear that quite a bit here at Nctd. Nctd is National Transit Database, which as a recipient of federal funding, we are required to submit monthly and annual financial reports for different modes of service. Within my role, I'm also responsible for analyzing short and long range financial planning. That can be done either through the development of the operating and capital budget, as well as performing analysis of fiscal impact on business decisions, such as the one that we are going to be transitioning very shortly, which is the in-house transition of the rail operations and maintenance of equipment. Next slide, please. So I will be providing a quick overview of the budget development process here in Nctd. Board Policy 17 provides the framework on how we develop budget at the district. Basic framework is that we are required to adopt a balanced budget, meaning that our total revenues and our total expenditures have to be equal, or our revenues have to be higher than expenses. We do not develop budgets that are deficits. We also make sure that within the estimates that are incorporated within the budget, we estimate the revenues conservatively. We always want to be more towards the lower end of estimating our revenues. And so that way we have, in the event that, expenses come higher than anticipated or revenues come lower than anticipated, we don't face any potential budgetary deficits. Another principle as well is that we have to ensure that one-time revenues should only be used for one-time expenses, and to use short and long-term debt only when it's appropriate and for valid purposes. Our capital program must also be constrained. Constrained means that we need to ensure that all our projects are funded before they are advanced for our implementation. Next slide, please. Within the capital improvement program, our budget process actually is broken down into two different phases. One phase is the CAP, which is the capital improvement program, and the next phase is the operating budget. The CAP process starts almost 1 year ahead of the beginning of the next fiscal year because it requires coordination with SANDAG to make sure that our projects are incorporated in the Regional Transportation Improvement Plan. Within the CIP, it typically starts on August or July, preceding the beginning of the next fiscal years. We initiate the program through a kickoff, and where we have project managers, department managers, and division chiefs participate, and they are responsible for developing the projects that should be implemented in the next 5 years. So they develop the project timeline as well as the financial needs to get those projects funded. We have to ensure that all the projects that are advanced within the CIP are in line with our transit asset management plan, and all our projects have to go through ranking and evaluation criteria to ensure that they meet to ensure that the most critical needs are funded. And the next slide, I will shortly show what are the criteria that weighs heavily on the decision on whether or not projects are advanced. The CIP is also initially approved in December and January by the board. However, it is reauthorized again in June before the beginning of the next fiscal year. Next slide, please. Within the evaluation criteria for ranking projects and determining what projects are advanced, the major factors that we consider are whether or not those projects are mandated by law. That means if a project is required to meet legal obligations either set by the California Public Utilities Commission, the Federal Railroad Administration, or any other governmental agency. We also have to continue the funding for projects that are already ongoing and for which Nctd has a contractual commitment. And projects that are necessary and needed for safety and security of our customers, as well as operations-wise, those also hang high within the criteria. We also continue funding projects to ensure that our assets are state of good repair, which may include overhauls or replacements. And then lastly, if a project is necessary to maintain a high customer satisfaction or also to increase ridership, those projects get funded. One thing that I want to note is that funding for Nctd is fairly constrained, and we are highly contingent on receiving discretionary grants in order to advance multiple projects within our CIP program. Next slide, please. This table provides an overview of our last adopted budget, which was for the fiscal year 2022, and the funding projected for the next 5 years. The projection for the funding comes from either the apportionment from the Federal Transit Administration, as well as some of the estimates that are provided for SANDAG. SANDAG is responsible for providing the estimates on the Transnet as well as the TDA sales tax dollars. So within those projections, we plan what will be our financial investments in the next fiscal year, in the next 5 years. As you can see within the graphic, the major sources of funding for Nctd are from the Federal Transit Administration. Unique to FY22, as well as probably in FY23, is that we did receive additional relief funds from CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. Those were in one-time relief funds that were awarded in 2020, 2021, and we don't anticipate to receive any additional COVID relief funds. Also, high sources of revenue for Nctd are derived from TDA. TDA is what's called the Transportation Development Act. Those are funds that are received from sales taxes. It's a statewide sales tax. And then the third major source of grant funding comes from Transnet, which is local sales tax for the San Diego region. As you can see in the pie chart from the grant side, most of the funding is programmed for preventive maintenance and for capital improvement program. For the operating expenses, a little bit less than 50% is used to support operations, for which Nctd has other funding sources to support the remaining operating expenses within our operating budget. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, from the major funding source that comes to Nctd comes from the Federal Transit Administration. The majority of these funding is formula-based, meaning that the federal government apportions the funding to the different metropolitan areas within the country based on population, density, and bus and rail vehicles and rail route miles. Within the San Diego region, the allocation of the funding is done 30% to Nctd and 70% to MTS. And there are restrictions as far as the use of the federal formula funds, in that they can only be used to cover capital activities or what are called preventive maintenance expenses. Preventive maintenance expenses means that those are activities, supplies, labor needed to maintain our assets in a state of good repair, which may include, for example, bridge inspection, or as well as reactive maintenance, electrical inspections or whatnot. Federal funding cannot be used to pay for operations or for fuel costs or for liability insurance. And then the next funding source coming from the state are the state transit assistance and state of good repair funding. This funding comes from the statewide sales tax on gasoline and diesel. And then the funds are allocated by the state based on agency revenue and population. Next slide, please. Also, from the state level, Nctd recently started receiving, since 2018, what's called state rail assistance. This was a new funding source that was created by Senate Bill number 1. This specific funding is only for commuter rail operators in California, of which there are 5 in total. And each operator receives the funding based on a formula that combines a fixed amount plus a variable amount, which is based on service level. And then finally, from the local standpoint, like I mentioned earlier, the major sources of funding comes from TDA and Transnet. Both are derived from sales taxes. And the allocation within the region is done based on population, which in the last 2 fiscal years, Nctd has received 29% of the total funding, and MTS has received 71%. Next slide, please. In this part chart, we wanted to illustrate the operating revenue sources for our last 2 adopted budgets. As you can see, for fiscal year 2022, federal grants make up about 40% of our total support. And for our local grants, which is TDA and Transnet, make up 39%. The reason that we wanted to show these 2 pie charts is that due to the ongoing effects on customer affairs, we have been relying more on federal grants from CARES Act to be able to support operations. FY21, we were budgeting about 31% for federal grants, and in FY22, we budgeted almost 10% higher funds from FTA dollars. Next slide, please. This pie chart illustrates within the different grants that Nctd received, which are the major funding sources. As you can see, the Federal Transit Administration FTA formulas make up 9%. Those funds can only be used for preventive maintenance type of expenses. And for fiscal year 2022, we budgeted about 19% from the American Rescue Plan Act funds and about 20% from the Federal CARES Act funds. And finally, a significant source for revenue Nctd, like I mentioned earlier, comes from TDA, which is about 35%, and from Transnet, which is approximately 12%. And then within the operating budget, also on the expense side, most of the expenses for Nctd come from purchase transportation costs. That's about 46%. Purchase transportation costs are contracted operations and maintenance for bus and rail services. From bus, which includes the Breeze, Lift, and Flex, that is provided by MV Transportation. And for the rail services, operations and maintenance, that is currently provided by Bombardier Transportation. Once the board reviews the operating budget for the next fiscal year, FY23, this percentage will decline, given that rail operations and maintenance are coming in-house to Nctd. And then you should consequently see as well an increase on salaries and benefits, given that that rail staff will become Nctd employees. The second largest category for our operating budget is related to professional services. Within professional services, we include the law enforcement and security services provided by the San Diego Sheriff's Department, Oceanside Police Department, and the Escalade Police Department. We also include within professional services the outsourced facilities maintenance that is currently performed by Bombardier Transportation. They are responsible for maintaining our different rail transit centers and stations, as well as we have in their legal services, oversight, audit, and special studies. All of those are included within professional services. Next slide, please. This table illustrates the actual performance of NCTD for the fiscal year that just ended, which was for fiscal year 2021, and how that compares to our adopted budget for fiscal year 2022. I do want to point out that for fiscal year 2021, NCTD was significantly under budget. We ended our total expenditures at $110 million. We actually had a surplus of $4 million, but overall, our budget savings was over $12 million. For this year, fiscal year 22 adopted budget, as you can see, we continue relying on the federal grants and local grants to support our operations. And our largest expense continues to be purchase transportation costs. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation, and I will now transition to our board chair.
Thank you very much, Yoon. And also thank you to Laura, Tracy, Ryan, Jennifer, Chris, Damon, Sean, Graham, and Karen for introducing yourselves and for all that you do for the district. Really appreciate it. That was a lot of useful information. I know that staff has much more to share, but we, of course, opted to keep it high level, hoping to stay within the allotted time. Speaking of time, it's been my personal experience that over time and with active participation, board members have the opportunity to learn a lot, to become familiar with the business activities of the district, and to appreciate the importance and complexity of the work performed by NCTD. Imelda, are there any public comments on this agenda item?
No, ma'am.
Okay, at this time, we're ending the public registration to speak on this item. Are there any questions from the board? I see no hands raised. With that, Jacob Gold, our senior legal counsel, will now review item 2. This is a very important presentation as it outlines the framework for the board to provide policy direction and oversight to the executive director and general counsel's leadership in performance of their duties. Jacob, you're on.
Good afternoon, board chair, members. My name is Jacob Gould, senior legal counsel here in the general counsel's office. This is kind of a pared down one of what we give our folks on onboarding, but hopefully it'll still be informative and fun. Melda, go to the next one there. So just by way of background, NCTD started as the North San Diego County Transit Development Board. And as you can see from that alphabet soup, it was a good thing we changed our name. That was back in 1975. It was created to plan, construct, operate either directly or through a contractor a public transportation system within our area jurisdiction. Go ahead. Our board authority and our enabling legislation comes from the Public Utilities Code. This can be found in Public Utility Code 125,000 and then following. All of that power that the legislature has given the district originates with the board of directors. So you as the board hold all the authority that the district has. Powers and duties of the board include maintaining and operating the system, adopting a budget, fixed compensation, adopting an administrative code, causing annual audits, appointing advisory committees as you deem necessary, and then to do all the things to carry out the purpose of the enabling legislation provides. That includes operation and maintenance of property, facilities, and everything else that we're going to get into here in this presentation. Go ahead. Our authority changed a little bit in terms of operational, sorry, not operational, but implementation of projects. Back in 2003, adopted in 2002 was Senate Bill 1703. So that transferred transit planning, programming, development, and construction from NCTD to SANDAG as the regional planning organization. NCTD continues to operate all of our modes. And implements any local and minor capital improvement projects through this board, but does offload those capacity enhancing type projects to SANDAG. Go ahead. So as I said, SANDAG is San Diego Region's Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. They're also the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. They're required by state and federal law to develop and adopt essentially what is the region's CIP. So that's the RTP, or sorry, the RTIP, the Regional Transportation Improvement Program. That covers a 5-year fiscal program and implements the long-range transportation plan for the San Diego region. The RTIP is a program of major highway, arterial transit projects, things like that. They're not going to get into our service planning or anything like that, but it is sort of the regional plan for those larger construction projects. This is where many of those capital improvement projects originate and are funded. So as this RTIP comes out, you'll see those CIPs as they flow down to fill out that program. Go ahead. Under 1703, SANDAG is going to implement our construction projects, including those regional capacity enhancing projects I had mentioned. Under 1703, we can enter into agreements to allow for the transfer of certain functions, and we did so under a master MOU. So this was done just after this was enacted. It was time consuming and cumbersome to do these individual MOUs for each project. And so because of that, a couple of years later, we entered into the 18th addendum. So it took us a couple of tries to figure this out. But after addendum 18, this allowed us to have the flexibility to transfer those capital projects to SANDAG upon mutual agreement. And we did so by a general form. And that form was the Exhibit A to addendum 18. And so you're going to hear this, if you haven't already, you're going to hear this as you sit with our board. Coming through, we're going to propose projects and transfers to SANDAG, and these will be, quote, Exhibit A projects. And so this is sort of the history as to how that got its name and where it came from. Go ahead. So Nctd regulation, the district governance in terms of the police power is, like I said, vested with the board. That's where the legislature put all of the authority. And the board can exercise that in a couple of different ways. The board can enact ordinances, which you can think of as kind of the laws of Nctd. Similar to the ordinances at your city, they cannot be waived by the board. They must be amended. And they require a public hearing and the same to go through in order to enact. It can't just be done at a single meeting to say, hey, I'd like to, invoke a new ordinance. It requires several steps to do. Go ahead. We currently have 4 ordinances on the books. The first 2 have been rescinded. So starting with Ordinance 3, this establishes all of our rules and regulations for all of our modes and all of our properties. Ordinance 4 establishes the general personal merit system and delegates day-to-day employee matters to the executive director, except for the general counsel. And those, as in the prior presentations, are the only 2 direct reports to the board. Ordinance 5 regulates our parking and Nctd parking lots. This has changed over the last couple of years as we're seeing more build out. We're shifting more to manage parking. It's not yet fully implemented. The pandemic and ridership levels and use of those parking lots put that on hold for a bit, but as we see these bounce back, you'll probably be seeing these come up more in the future. And then finally, Ordinance 6 allows us to join the alphabet soup of the Uniform Public Cost Constructing Accounting Act. Essentially what this does, and some of your cities may have joined into this as well, it's an opt-in program authorized by the state, which allows for higher thresholds for public projects and bidding. So this allowed us to do things in a more streamlined manner and hopefully get these projects out quicker and cheaper. Go ahead. As we mentioned before, the direct reports of the board are the executive director and general counsel. Go ahead. The primary responsibilities of the executive director has the sole authority to supervise all direct staff, with the exception of the general counsel and employee relations matters. He sets the long-term and short-term goals for the district, assisting the board in public relations and legislative liaisons, as well as managing and overseeing the budget and guiding Nctd toward the board developed goals. This is the only direct delegation of authority that the board has authorized. So essentially, if it's not in board policy 19, those items will be coming to you for approval at full board. Go ahead. The general counsel's the chief legal advisor for the district, so long as it's within the official powers and duties, represents all legal matters related to litigation and claim management, responsible for district-wide legal services for everything that we do, also drafts and approves all of our contracts, all of our real estate agreements, and advises the divisions and departments on anything that may come up in a legal capacity. And then the general counsel also reviews all items coming to the board for approval. Go ahead. Like I said, the scope of the general counsel is limited to the official powers and duties on behalf of the district. And the general counsel is counsel to the agency as a whole, so not one individual member. So all the privileges that go along with the general attorney-client privilege, those are held by the board itself and cannot be waived except for an action of the board. I'm going to hop into the board policies review. So this is sort of the second way that the board can enact its police power. The executive director and general counsel assisted the board in the development and implementation of these policies to kind of guide the day-to-day activities. So these get a little more granular than kind of those big umbrella ordinances that we have. And the first board policies were actually adopted fairly recently for the district in 2012. And we do annual updates in the second quarter of each year. So in the fall, these all come to the board for any updates that are required. Unlike an ordinance, however, the policies can be waived on a case-by-case basis by the board. It does take a majority vote, but it does not require that policy to be amended. So one that does come up often and actually was amended in board policy 11 is for mutual public benefit for use of property or for a scope where we would normally require sort of a fair market value give and take. That can be waived by the board on a finding of mutual benefit, and that was adopted into policy directly. So that's kind of an example of how these can be flexible for certain situations. We currently have 34 board policies. I'm going to go through all of them. In general, I'm only going to pop out on a couple of the key ones, but if there are any questions, please stop me and let me know. If we go through in depth on all of these, this becomes a very, very long presentation. So we're just going to try to hit the high notes. So board policy number one is just the general policy that establishes sort of the policy for all policies and how they're implemented. Board policy number two is the appointment of the board of directors. So this establishes the appointment process for the chair and vice chair. And then board policy 3 does the same for the committees and external appointments. So currently there are 3 committees that the board has established. So the executive committee, which is responsible for oversight and guidance to the full board. It's also responsible for the annual performance review of the executive director and general counsel. And then this is the committee that actually reviews all of the policies that come during that fall renewal. The marketing, service planning, and business development, or MISPDA, that is the committee that regulates all the development and marketing communication plans, service plans, and strategies based on ridership and revenue. And then finally, we have the PAF, or the Performance Administration and Finance Committee, and this committee is responsible for preparation of the budget and reviews critical performance indicators. Go ahead. Board policy number 4 establishes the rules and procedures for the conduct of our board meetings. So this is this is where the Brown Act, Robert's Rules of Order is cited, and kind of how the board meetings go. And so if there's changes to the way that the board wants to run the meeting, this is the place that they would go to take a look and update. Board policy number 5 is the public notice and participation policy, and this establishes the public hearing procedures for a budget adoption, as well as other matters that require a public hearing, major service changes, and adoption and modification of ordinances. So this is how we handle those items. Board policy number 6, this is the AB 1234 training that I'm sure all of you have received at your cities. This is our ethics training policy. And then board policy 7 is the board member compensation and travel policy. And this is how you get reimbursed for your travel or offsite meetings, things like that. This establishes the process for that. Go ahead. Board policy number 8, this is a big one. So this is our conflict of interest code. This establishes all of our rules related to conflict of interest, serves as our code of conduct required under the Fair Political Practices Act. This is also the designation form for the SEI, the Statement of Economic Interest filing, or the Form 700, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. In addition to the standard stuff that is in most public entity code of conduct, this also adds in FTA Guideline 4220.1 requirements. So 4220.1 is the FTA guideline document that establishes how we can spend FTA money. So because they are one of our larger grant agencies, we've adopted that right into our code of conduct so that it's baked into everything that we do. We don't have to do something different if we have an FTA grant. Within this policy, we also designate the disclosure categories for each of those designated filers. And there's 5 different categories. They range from very broad, which is the first one, and that's basically anything that happens within the jurisdiction of the district. So pretty much all of San Diego County. And then the most narrow, number 5, is limited to the regulatory permit or licensing authority of an individual department. So depending on where you fall on the org chart and if you are identified as a Form 700 filer, you will also have a designation of a disclosure category. And this dictates what you have to put on that Form 700 and what you really have to watch out for. And they really correspond to how much potential influence you have over the way that the district does spend money. Go ahead. Board policy number 9 is our investment policy. So this establishes the policy to protect our investment principle, ensure compliance, and meet the needs of the district based on our investments. Board policy number 10 is our cash reserve. This establishes all of our reserve fund requirements in terms of emergency and high priority. We have a targeted balance in our reserve of 15 million, and this does encompass our self-insured retention under our insurance policy as well. Next. Board policy 11, I mentioned this one before, so this is our real estate policy. This establishes our management goals, disposal, acquisition, and incidental use of real property requirements. So acquisition and disposal of real property does require board approval. So we can't acquire or get rid of property without coming to the board, but the executive director is responsible for management of all of our real property assets. As I mentioned before, we've incorporated incidental use into this policy. So that may also be approved by the executive director if it's at fair market value and in compliance with the policy, or if we find a mutual public benefit or what we call an equivalent reciprocal benefit to Nctd and that other public agency, then that can also be approved by the executive director. That was one that we had to come back to the board time and time again, and we've adopted into this policy here. Board policy number 12 is excess real property utilization. So this basically establishes a disposition policy in compliance with our FTA requirements for any FTA funded real property. Go ahead. Board policy number 13, this is our advertising, concessions, and merchandising. So this establishes our guidelines for our revenue generating advertising program. So the train wraps and the bus wraps you see, those are all done under this. And this is in place to make sure that we retain control over this, don't turn that into a general public forum, and we can make sure that we have advertisements that not only are beneficial to the district, but also keep it in line with district goals. So we just don't open this up to be a billboard out on the train. It is a managed and closed program. Board policy number 14 is our record management document control. So this goes hand in hand with board policy 15, which is our records retention policy. So these two policies work together to provide for a document management and control system. And then board policy 15 establishes the retention based on that system. So this is required of any public agency based under the Public Records Act. This allows us to make sure that we're keeping the things we need to keep for the appropriate amount of time. And then once they've reached that end of that timeline, unless they've been identified separately, then those records can be either destroyed or taken off site, and we can keep everything in order and make sure we're in compliance with the law. Next, public records requests. So this policy under board policy 16 establishes policy for receipt and response to public records requests. This is a guideline for the district on how to process these. Of course, a Public Records Act request does not require a specific form or a specific person to be filed, but this policy allows us to sort of track all of those instances and make sure that we are responsive to any public records request that comes in. Board policy number 17 is the budget development, establishes the budget development process and also the monitoring and control provisions that are required there. And then board policy number 18 is the Railroad Safety and Community Enhancement Project. So this is the one that establishes quiet zones and wayside horns and provides for accountability and liability structure. The board has essentially stated that should any agency meet all these requirements, that here is the maintenance and liability structure that we will require for those projects or for those agreements, so that we're not negotiating these on a one-off basis, and it's equally applied across the district for all cities. Go ahead. Board policy 19. So this is the big one we had talked about earlier. This is the delegation of authority to the executive director. Some of the things that are in there, not all, but the kind of the highlight ones are the executive director is authorized to award any task or contract so long as it doesn't exceed $200,000 and it's consistent with the board adopted budget. And then to amend any contract or extend any contract so long as it doesn't exceed $100,000. That is a cumulative value there. So it's either a one-time $100,000 extension or revision, or if it's a 5-year extension at $20,000, that would be okay. But that 6th year, it's going to have to come back to the board because that would exceed that authority. He also has the ability to declare an emergency and public exigency in order to dispense with formal procurement guidelines. Does require ratification there, so it's not something that can just be done in the blind. Execute any real property agreements that are authorized, execute MOAs and memorandums of agreement, so long as there's no transaction where it exceeds $100,000. And then approve settlement, that is settlement authority is at $50,000. Funding documents, and then general day-to-day personnel, operational, all of those things subject to direction of the board. So again, the board sets our goals and policies, and those have to be followed. But essentially, if it's not within the list provided in board policy 19, you should be seeing it in front of you at the dais at a public meeting. Okay. Board policy 20 and 21 are complimentary transit passes and complimentary ADA paratransit program. So this provides for the policy and procedure for distribution of those passes and the approach to paratransit operations in accordance with ADA law. And then board policy 22 is related to service requests. So if we have a specific service request, this is the policy that identifies how that is supposed to be carried out. Board policy 23. So this is our AWW policy. This establishes how AWWs are put in place, or an absolute work window. As Matt said, we really like acronyms here. Capital activities are required to maintain in a state of good repair. And in order to do that, sometimes we do have to shut down operations on the rail lines. Can't really dig up the rails with the trains having to go over. And so we do that, try to compact those all into an absolute work window or an AWW so that we can disrupt service as little as possible. In order to do that, we have to have some clear demonstration as to why it's required. Try to get it as short amount of time as possible, and then make sure that these are planned well in advance. So every now and again, we will get a request that, hey, there's this event that is happening in my jurisdiction, or, a third party may come to us and say, I'd really like to be able to do this construction. It's right next to the railroad, and if no trains are going by, that would be fantastic. And they give us maybe a week or two. These are generally planned out well in advance, 6 to 9 months, and allows for us to get the word out to people who rely on that transportation service, so that we're not, impacting them unnecessarily. Go ahead. Board policy number 24 is our employee drug and alcohol policy. So we do have requirements under the Department of Transportation as well as the FTA for drug and alcohol, and those are designated specific employees, and Nctd has also identified employees who are required for drug and alcohol testing based on safety, and then it is a general drug and alcohol-free workplace as well. Many agencies have something similar, but we do have the operational and safety aspect, which is a bit unique to Nctd that most other jurisdictions do not have to directly implement. Board policy number 25 is our DBE, or Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Policy. This provides for an equal opportunity to participate in district contracts, and is a general requirement for most of our compliance activity with our grant programs as well. Go ahead. Board Policy 26 is our discrimination complaint procedure. This establishes that process for receiving discrimination complaints from non-employees. So this would be anyone who's not employed by NCTD, mostly targeted at our ridership. And we also have Board Policy number 27, which is our Equal Employment Opportunity, or EEO policy. And this is our non-discrimination on all employment actions. Board Policy number 28 is our fraud prevention. So this establishes our whistleblower protections. And all of these kind of go hand in hand to make sure that we are compliant not only with our state and federal requirements, but to make sure that it's a discrimination-free place to work, as well as our modal operations, and that there is an outlet for those complaints. Board Policy number 29 is our asset management policy. So this allows for distinguishing capital and operating assets, and then management of tangible property. So this is kind of where your cities sort of tag everything that they've got, make sure that it's all in a system, and that we're tracking its useful life, and any disposition that is required has to be in compliance with that asset management policy. Board Policy number 30 is our threshold for major service change. So when you see service change items come before you, there is a threshold for major service change where 25% change in the configuration or the daily trips, or an elimination or addition of a route, that requires a public hearing and a Title VI analysis. So those will all come to you. You'll see a whole bunch of people be presenting a lot of information. These are taken very seriously, and make sure that we do it correctly. Go ahead. Board Policy number 31, this is our threshold for disparate impact on minority populations. So there's a general 10% threshold for impact where it does impact a minority population more than the non-minority population, and then any alternatives have to be reviewed and considered. So in order to move forward, you have to have a substantial legitimate reason for that service change if those alternatives cannot be used. And this is to make sure that any major service change does not have a different impact on a minority population than it does on the general population, to make sure that we're implementing that service fairly. Go ahead. And then number 32 is the threshold for disproportionate burden on low income populations. So this is the same threshold, and it's the same thing to make sure that we're not implementing these changes that have an unfair or disproportionate impact on our low income populations. Go ahead. Board Policy 33, this is one of our newer ones, and we've been utilizing it in a lot of our real estate development programs. So this is our joint use and development of real property. So this establishes the policy for joint use and our real property development goals in order to achieve the maximum utilization of our property. So you've seen Tracy make her presentation on all of our Sprinter stations, as well as our joint development projects that we've got at OTC, rolling out at Carlsbad. Those all fall under this, and as well as our general real property policies. So this allows us to do that kind of joint use connection if it is right for the district. And then lastly, Board Policy number 34 allows for unsolicited proposals. So generally we go out for a solicitation, we put out the parameters of what we're looking for, and we let the public then tell us if they can, meet those, and how they can best fit out the competition and get selected for that award. From time to time, people do come to us and say, hey, I have a really unique, new and novel idea. You've never thought about it before, but I would like to propose this thing, and you do not have a solicitation out. This is the policy for that. Generally, what it requires is to have something really be new and novel. If just somebody says, hey, I've got this piece of property, I think it'd be great if you wanted to partner with me on development, that may not fall under this policy. We may have to go all the way out. But if somebody, invents a new mode of transportation that's never been seen before and wants to talk to us about it, this is kind of where they would go. Go ahead. And I think that is the end of that. I know that is a whirlwind on all of these. As I said, if there's any questions on any specific ones, I'm happy to get into those. Specifically on our code of conduct and some of the others, you'll be seeing those from time to time as we do those updates for all of our board members. And you should also be seeing the AB 1234 through your cities. But if for whatever reason you don't get that through your local agency, please feel free to reach out to us and we can help you out with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Imelda, do we have any public comments on this agenda item?
No, ma'am.
Okay, at this time, we're ending the public registration to speak on this item. Kelly, Katie, Peter, are you guys ready for the test? Sorry, couldn't help it. No test. The next scheduled meetings are the Executive Committee meeting March 1st, 2022 at 11 a.m., the regular board meeting March 17th, 2022 at 2 p.m. Thank you all for joining us today and for this orientation. And thank you to Matt and Lori as well. I forgot to thank them earlier. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Eddie.
Thank you.